Hey guys, welcome to this very special episode of TFL Talking Cars, and as always, it's myself and
me,
my son Tommy, and today we're going to be talking about Subarus, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about why they are the best, and Tommy, the worst off-roaders you can buy.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about this topic, but let's start talking about it.
Yeah, and we'll explain that as this podcast goes on. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Sit back and relax or keep driving if you're driving. TFL Talking Cars is on the air, the world's most popular car podcast. Okay, maybe not yet, but we're working on it. Before we explain it, let's talk about the history of Subarus and four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, because Subaru has a prominent role to play in that, and not maybe 15 feet that way is a 1978 Subaru DL that we bought about a month ago and recently took off-roading in Moab on a relatively difficult off-road course obstacle called Fins and Things, right? It's a classic Moab trail where it tests the vehicle's approach, departure, breakover, it's all-wheel drivability, it's low range. And those are the things that make a Subaru good and bad off-road. And I was actually super surprised that this 1978 Subaru was able to actually complete the entire test that we set out for it. And I think it kind of clarified everything I believe in Subarus. Now, let's be clear here. Over the last 10 years, Tommy, me and you have taken pretty much every car that has been made that can go off-road. Every car.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm talking about everything from Jeeps to pickup trucks to Toyotas to even stuff we probably shouldn't have been taking off-road, things like, Kias, pretty much anything with either an all-wheel drive or a four-wheel drive system we've taken off-road. And so I think we're in a unique position to judge which cars perform off-road and which cars don't perform off-road. But before we get to all that, let's kind of talk about that old DL that we own and why it was significant in the development of all-wheel drive cars in America.
Well, if you want to talk about Subaru,
yeah,
the company itself dates back, to the 1950s. They're a very old...
Or is it Subaru?
Yeah, very old Japanese auto manufacturer. And Subaru of America was founded in 1968. And the first vehicles they imported were these small, little, basically bubble cars.
Cheap and ugly.
Yeah, cheap and ugly
was their that really was their advertising campaign. Yep. Cheap and ugly.
And do you remember the story of the gentleman who founded Subaru?
Yeah, the guy who basically started with Bricklin. The guy who conceived of Bricklin.
Yeah.
Was the
importer.
The importer of Subaru.
Exactly. That. Yeah.
And I can't recall his name right now.
Right. So I shouldn't say founding. Founding is obviously wrong.
Right.
So the company.
He's the importer.
Yeah, he was the importer of these very affordable, very small two-stroke cars, actually, into the U.S. in the 1960s.
And if you look at some of their old advertising campaigns, they're hilarious. I remember seeing the ad where this woman is trucking down to the beach, and it's Subaru,
right?
Cheap and cheerful, right? Was it cheap and cheerful?
Cheap and ugly.
It wasn't even cheerful. It was cheap and ugly.
Cheap and ugly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
Yes.
Can you imagine that today? A campaign, an advertising campaign, national campaign, where today's Hondas are cheap and ugly. It just wouldn't fly.
Now, the real establishment of Subaru as we know it today, though, really came in the 1970s. So the cars that they imported into the U.S. stopped being these basically little cubes on wheels and started to compete more with real automobiles that could do highway speeds.
Yeah, what made Subaru, I mean, if there's one word that I would use to describe Subaru from the very get-go is quirky, right? It's always been quirky, whether it's the fact that it has a boxer engine or the fact that the design has always been kind of, to the left or right of mainstream, to the fact that they've always kind of danced to their own tune, right? Never following mainstream. Quirky is, I think, the best word to describe them. And the thing I want to mention here is the Subaru that we bought was owned by one woman here in Boulder.
Well, we're not there yet.
Okay.
We've got a long way to go.
All right, I'll hold off on that story until you get there.
So in the 1970s, Subaru started importing a vehicle called the Leon, as it was known around the world. And that's kind of the vehicle that really established the foothold with Subaru here in the U.S., and it was available in a bunch of different configurations. So same basic platform, but they had a coupe, a sedan, a station wagon, your typical four-door family car, all sorts of different body styles. But the one that was most significant came to the U.S. in 1974 as a 1975 model year, and that was a four-wheel drive station wagon. So if you look at the cars sold in the U.S. in the 1970s, you had Volkswagens.
Yep.
Hugely popular, right?
Yeah.
Small commuters.
You're talking about foreign cars, not American
No.
cars.
Just in the U.S.
Right.
The Volkswagen was one of the best-selling cars in the U.S. in the 70s.
Yeah, especially the Beetle. I mean, the Beetle was super popular.
Yeah, and then
60s, 70s.
And then you had the whole line of American boats, right? So
Yeah.
everything from Caprices
Your
to
grandfather
LTDs.
had an LTD.
Yeah, LTDs, exactly, to Cutlasses, and they were
Big.
huge, heavy. By the 1970s, emissions clogged.
One-wheel drive.
Yeah, rear-wheel drive, open diff, so one-wheel drive. And then you had Subaru come in along with the other Japanese manufacturers, right? So starting in the 70s, you saw this huge emergence. In the 60s too, but primarily the 70s.
Yeah, Honda came in with the Civic, basically.
Yep.
It was a CVCC. Toyota came with the Corolla.
Yep,
right?
Camry, started coming on the scene.
Yeah, exactly.
And among those waves was Subaru. Subaru was different, though, because they didn't do things the traditional way, right? They didn't just simply have small inline four-cylinder engines, front-wheel drive. When the Subaru that really became famous was the four-wheel drive wagon in 1975. And it was a complete departure from anything on the market, because not only did it have a very small flat four, but it also had the ability to power all four wheels with the flick of a lever.
Yeah, let's talk about the history of four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. And the difference between the two, by the way, all-wheel drive is a vehicle that does not have a low-speed transfer case. In general, that's what the definition is. And a four-wheel drive vehicle does have, but that's been muddied. But in general, that's just a very simple. Don't get picky on me. I know.
I would even make it simpler than that.
Yeah.
If you have to pull a lever or flick a switch to engage four-wheel drive, that's four-wheel drive. If it's running all the time with all four wheels,
I think it's a different.
all-wheel
I think the transfer case is what makes.
Yeah, but
the
this
difference.
doesn't have a transfer case.
That's right. But I'm saying in general, a transfer case. A truck will have a traditional low-speed, low-range transfer case, so that's four-wheel drive, whereas an Audi will not. Anyway, so Subaru came in with these four-wheel drive cars, which in today's terminology will be all-wheel drive cars, because at that point it didn't have a transfer case, right? Ours doesn't have a transfer case.
Yeah, but it is real four-wheel drive.
Anyway,
it's
let us know in the comments below. This is a conversation we've had for the last 10 years, and we're not going to solve it today. But let me go back to the history. So the first car that actually had four-wheel drive available was a Jensen Interceptor. That was
the first car.
That was the first car. Now, we're not talking about trucks. We're not talking about Jeeps, right? Jeeps are their own thing. The first car.
Yeah, the FF. But it was a super limited run, very expensive, basically Grand Tour, a British Grand Tour.
Right. And so when this Subaru, our Subaru little wagon DL was purchased, it was purchased because the woman who was a scientist here in Boulder at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in 1978 wanted a car that was four-wheel drive where she didn't have to go and lock the hubs manually, which is what you would have had to do at that time in a pickup truck or in a Jeep.
Right. And the other four-wheel drive options back in the day would have been a CJ, a Scout,
right.
a Blazer,
locking
Bronco.
hubs.
Yep, and the way those work is two-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive.
Yep.
Then you pull a lever to four-wheel drive. But to actually get the front axle to come alive, you have to get out and turn these little knobs.
And I had a Suzuki Samurai, and if you ever do that in the snow, it's a pain in the butt because snow gets packed in there and you can't turn it and it's cold. Anyway, so she wanted a vehicle where you didn't have to do that. And this is, of course, before the AMC Eagle, which came along later. So a lot of people were like, when we did that video at Moab, by the way, you should watch that. It's an amazing job you did, Tommy. I was amazed by how good that car was. But yeah, a lot of people are like, well, how about the AMC Eagle? You know, that came along after the Subaru. So Subaru was a pioneer in the world and in America it's called, because the car has the four-wheel drive logo on it, right? It says four-wheel drive, but I'm calling it basically all-wheel drive.
I'm sorry, let's dive into this rabbit hole for just a second.
No, I don't want to dive into the rabbit hole.
If you have to pull a lever to make it go
I don't want to pull back because the problem with
all-wheel drive.
No, the problem with pulling levers is now in a truck you push a button, you spin a rotary dial. Don't go down the lever.
Okay, what about this? If you have to do anything to make all four wheels get power, it's four-wheel drive.
It's if you have a low speed transfer
But
case.
this doesn't have one.
It doesn't.
And it's proper four-wheel drive.
It's not.
It
By my
is.
definition, it's not.
Your definition is wrong. I'm
No,
sorry.
my
It's a bad
my definition is a definition. I actually went and asked a boatload of automotive journalists, and these are respectable automotive journalists who have been doing this their whole lives. I went and asked them specifically how they would define all-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive, and all of them without one said they didn't say it's a push a lever, it's a push a button. They said it's defined by a low-speed transfer case.
Well, okay, what about this? Silverado, the new Silverado doesn't have a low-speed transfer case. Is that four-wheel drive?
Yeah, it does. What do you mean?
No, not. You can get it without a low-speed transfer case.
Right, but there's always exceptions, right? You can,
And this is an exception. The Subaru
is an exception, but it's that's why I keep calling it all-wheel drive and Subaru versus four-wheel drive. Anyway, ever since then, Subaru has had a reputation for building these quirky four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive cars, right? And there's a bunch of them, right? And we've owned a bunch of them. So let's talk about perhaps the quirk. There's actually 3 that were super quirky, and I'm going to go in quirkiness order, with number 1 being the quirkiest, right?
Okay.
So number 3, I think, probably was the XT.
Okay, so
That was an 80s car
right.
that looked like a giant wedge.
So we should explain that our car has round headlights.
Right.
And it looks pretty dopey looking.
Right,
It's got
yeah.
4 round headlights. It's got this weird belt line that's
Yeah.
got this curve in it. Starting in the early 1980s, we saw the second generation of Leon come along.
Yeah.
And those became very angular.
Yeah.
Right. So where the 70s was kind of just a dopey thing.
But-
in the 80s, they became angular. And that's when we got to see the Subaru really come to life in the U.S. So we had the Leon, but one of the most famous ones was the XT. Which
I
looks
would say
like
it was famous. I think it was one of the most. I mean, if you're not into it was. I had a cousin who had a friend who had one. They weren't famous. They were just kind of weird.
Well, it looks like a doorstop.
It looks like a doorstop, and its claim to fame was that it had this LED display that was really kind of unique, and actually it looked like a little bit like an early video game. If you can imagine what like Pac-Man looked like, it was like that in the display, and it had all the controls mounted so you could reach them easily on the basically on the binnacle.
Yeah, and the other thing too is it was jet fighter inspired.
Yeah.
So the transmission selector looked like a joystick.
And what was on top? There was a cool little button.
Yeah, to engage four-wheel
Four-wheel
drive.
drive, exactly.
And the important thing that
By the way, we want one of those. So if you know of one that's for sale, I've been looking for one. They're hard to find.
the important thing to note about all these 70s and 80s Subarus, right, is that they're front-wheel drive when you drive them around every day.
Yeah.
So they're not four-wheel drive unless you need them. They really do operate like a truck. So when you go to the grocery store and it's dry, or when you drop your kids off when it's dry, it's just a front-wheel drive car like any other Japanese car. It's not until you get to snow or dirt or mud that you click the button on top of the shifter, or you pull a lever, and then that's when you have a permanent four-wheel drive.
And before I get to the number 2 quirky car, the other thing, there's actually a couple things that make Subarus unique. Just like a Porsche, it's got a boxer engine, right? So that the cylinders are horizontally opposed, right? In a 4-cylinder, they go like this. In a Subaru, they go like that.
The podcast people don't know what you're doing.
Up and down, left and right.
Okay.
There you go. And so I think it's the only other major manufacturer that still has boxer engines. And it does a couple other things for the vehicle, right? It puts the nice thing about a boxer, because the pistons go horizontally, is it puts the weight down low. So if you're building a sports car, which the XT was, it wasn't an off-road car, right? It was a sports car. It put the weight down low, giving it better handling. And in a lot of ways, Subaru was way ahead of all these other vehicles that eventually became all-wheel drive and had low centers of gravity.
Well, sure.
Yeah, there's one other way that it was ahead, and the XT was a perfect example of that, because the engine had 2 different. You could get it in 2 different configurations, which was really unique at the time.
Yeah, so, I mean, turbocharging.
Exactly.
That was a big deal.
Yeah,
back in the
Subaru
day.
was one of the first ones to actually start turbocharging their.
I think we should say
Boxer
turbocharging normal cars. So turbocharging was around for a long time.
Yeah, the
on high
911. The
performance.
911 turbo was around.
Yeah, but like Saab and Subaru especially.
Yeah.
And even later Toyota did some stuff in the 80s with turbocharging. But I think the interesting thing about the 1980 Subarus,
Yeah.
we got the XT, right?
Yeah.
Talked about the XT, talked about the Leon.
Yeah.
They were great off-road, but I don't think they were intended to be really great off-road. Because if you look at the advertising from the 70s and 80s, it's always a car driving through snow, or it's a Subaru will take you where your other car can't. But the key is even if you read like the owner's manuals, they just happen to be really good off-road. People figured this out in the 70s because they were very lightweight.
Well, because they were the only cars you could take off-road. And when I mean cars, I mean they were the only non-Jeeps and non-trucks you could seriously take off-road. And after we posted that video of the little guy going up and over fins and things, everybody was like, hey, I had one of those, you know, and it was unstoppable in the snow. And at that time, like I said, your grandfather LTD, which had one-wheel drive, and I can't tell you, growing up in Chicago, how many times I spent trying to push that thing up our driveway or push it, you know, down the road when there was snow, because a one-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive car has no traction, basically.
Right.
It was, I mean, you look at the videos from
like
the
a
70s,
skateboard.
it's like, all you hear is like, right, the one wheel spinning. That's all you ever see in those videos.
Yeah, and if you wanted to get through those conditions, you'd have to buy a CJ, which would be basically like a shopping cart on the road. It would
Right.
be horrible to drive. Or you could buy a Subaru.
All right, so number 2 on their quirky scale.
What?
Your grandma had this. What car was it?
This isn't. No, we can't go into this one yet.
Why?
Just because we're not at this era yet. We gotta
You
wait.
keep talking about
We're still in the 80s. Don't go to the 90s yet.
all
We're still in the
right,
80s.
all right, whatever.
So eventually what happened, though, I think, is these Subarus were being used in off-road terrain, right?
Well, people use
Without
them.
the lower...
People use them in places like, you know, you didn't buy Subarus in Florida and California.
Well, they were huge in the Northwest,
Right,
Northeast.
exactly. They were huge in
Anywhere with snow.
anywhere with snow or anywhere with mountains. So Subaru's got a foothold here in Colorado and Montana and Wyoming, and of course they had a huge foothold up in the Northeast, right? Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, New York, places like that.
But
They established themselves.
The interesting thing is the vast majority of the marketing...
And
is going-
Northwest too, actually.
Yeah, I said Northwest.
Yeah.
Is going through snow. But then in the 80s, Subaru decided, you know, let's take it up the next level. And they installed a low-range transfer case in their cars.
And we actually also had that car, right?
Yeah.
We called him Max. I bought him when you were just a baby, and it was your au pair. We had no pair for you at the time, and it was her car.
And basically what the low-range transfer case does is it multiplies the available torque so that that little tiny low-powered four-cylinder now has the ability to go very slowly but go just about anywhere. And I think that's really where the vehicles became super capable. So like our 1978 car was never available with it. Very good off-road, but it's very limited by the small amount of torque.
But Max had it.
In the 80s, yeah, exactly. They incorporated this thing, which is unheard of. I mean, really, there's not a single car, not truck or SUV today, available with a low-range transfer case. It's one of the only ones in history that has one.
Subaru's always danced to their own drummer, and what Max was an 80s wagon with square headlights,
It's like
right?
an 84.
Yeah, with
83.
square headlights. And the other thing that made it unusual, which the DL also has, is that the spare tire was mounted right on top of the engine, which is kind of weird. It's not great for a spare tire to be always that hot.
And then in the late 70s,
That's true.
Things get even crazier, right?
Yeah.
With the introduction of the, bi-drive recreational all-terrain transporter.
That's number 1 on my list.
Yeah, so we're going there because we're in the 80s.
All right, you want to talk about that?
I'm overwhelming you, yeah. So that, of course, is the Subaru Brat.
Right.
And basically what they did is they chopped the back off a station wagon and made a teeny-weeny pickup truck. But
Because of the chicken tax
because
law.
of the chicken tax here, which puts huge taxes on imported trucks, they added these jump seats in the back. So you had a tiny truck with four-wheel drive, a flat 4, T-tops in some cases,
Right.
and seats in the bed. Unheard of. It was just the weirdest.
And the T-tops were kind of really crazy. We actually tried to buy one. I remember we test drove it.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
It was pretty slow, and it was in pretty bad shape. And they had 2 generations of Brats, right? And that's another one I'd like to buy, but they're also very hard to find. And the reason both, like the Brat and the XT and the DLs are hard to find is because Subaru did not use the highest quality of metals. And since they lived in places like Portland where it rained all the time, or here in Colorado where it snows, they rusted away.
Yeah, that's kind of an understatement. They basically rot away if you sneeze on them. They just really struggle in any kind of a wet environment to maintain their body panels. And
The old ones.
But that's the same with pretty much every 70s Japanese car, right?
Yeah,
Toyotas,
the Civics,
Datsuns,
the Corollas, all of them.
All of them
kind of went away.
Right.
And so the Brat eventually turned into the Baja. Right, so
yeah, in the early 2000s.
Yeah, in the early 2000s. So Subaru did keep up, and now there is a resurgence of that kind of a vehicle. Right, it's like El Camino, Baja, Brat, right, where it's basically a ute. Right, the Australians would call it a ute. It's basically a sedan that had the back seats chopped up and put replaced with a bed.
Right.
So those cars are making a comeback because Hyundai's coming out with a Santa Cruz very shortly, which is basically another car like that.
Yep.
But we're way ahead of us. So number 3 was the XT. Number 1 was the Brat. What was the one in the middle? Your grandma had it.
That was the SVX.
Yep.
So that was the 90s. And the SVX is an interesting story because all throughout the 80s, you had the Subarus like the Justies and the Leons and the Brats were very, very purposeful cars, but not very exciting.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they were extremely good off-road.
They were slow.
They were very slow.
They were slow.
Very slow, yeah. And in fact, I was watching this 80s commercial in the XT, and it was this old guy farmer, right? And he had this son who's like a yuppie. And the dad, the farmer, says, I want you to go out and buy a Subaru, because that's all we've owned. They lived on a farm. And then it cuts like this 80s music and this wedge thing blasting through these country roads. And he shows up, and the dad's like, I thought I told you to buy a Subaru. And the son's like, I did. And it was the XT. And they took that to the next level in the 90s with the SVX, which was their second attempt at a really sporty coupe.
It was an Italian-designed car. So they outsourced the design to whatever his name is, Giorgio, whatever. I never can pronounce his name.
Was it Giugiaro?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he did this kind of jet canopy, and what made that car unique, and I haven't seen any other cars that actually had this, is they had kind of a window within a window. So the idea was you could only roll the windows up about 2/3 of the way, and the top part of the window was actually kind of a window that kind of bowed out. And so what they used to tell me was that you could actually drive that car in the rain and not get any water into it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah. And so your grandma had it. You and your mom drove it out here to Colorado because it was a great car in the snow. It was really stylish, and it actually took Subaru away from that kind of quirky design to more mainstream, elegant design,
right.
With big kind of exhaust pipes that are not very popular. It actually has the same exhaust pipes that are on our Silverado, these kind of squinty, wide exhaust pipes. It had a boxer engine that produced, I believe it was 220 horsepower, so it was actually pretty punchy, and 4-seater, 2-door coupe, capable in the snow, nice to look at, and those are available. You can actually find those. Those are out there. People like them. Your cousin still has one.
And if you there's a big transition that happened in the early 90s where Subaru went from designing basically shoeboxes to actually making very off-road worthy shoeboxes, but to making more rounded out, more on-road worthy cars. So you saw, the Impreza, the Legacy, all these cars throughout the 90s, the SVX, still had four-wheel drive, more all-wheel drive then. They went to more permanent solutions rather than having to pull a lever. So they kind of transitioned to all-wheel drive, and then they also transitioned to lower vehicles, right? So the ground clearance decreased, and they became much more streetable. But they were still definitely a hint toward the off-road capability of the 80s. And when you start looking at like the early 2000s and even the late 90s, that's when you saw the emergence of the Outback and the Forester. And that era of Subaru are pretty amazing. I would love to actually get like the first generation Outback from when they started lifting the Legacy wagon, up and putting the nice wheels and the cladding on it. And then the first couple generations of Forester are extremely capable. So they went from making low, sleek cars in the 90s to kind of going back more toward the off-road spectrum.
Well, here's the magic in Subaru, Tommy. And Subaru was able to do something that in the last 10 years that a lot of companies that tried to do it could not do it. And let me give you an example of two companies that tried to do it. So they went from being a small niche brand, right? I mean, Subaru was selling less than 100,000 units for a long time in America. A long time. And this is, keep in mind that Ford sells 400,000 F-150s every year, and Subaru, could not sell over 100,000 combined vehicles. And then what they did, and this is the magic that other brands were not able to do, is they were able to take this quirky vehicle that had a very loyal following in very specific geographic locations in America and blow it out and make it mainstream. And other brands that tried that failed were Saab, right? GM tried to do that with Saab. They purchased Saab and they tried to make it kind of less of a professor car and more of a general brand, and failed miserably at it. In fact, it failed so much that the brand no longer exists. Scion tried to do the same thing, right, where they try to go from this kind of niche, cool, hip brand into more of a general brand. Failed as well, had to roll it back into Toyota. So history is littered with brands that have tried to go from being small and quirky and unique and having a very loyal following to being mainstream. And this is where we get into why Subarus are both great and terrible off-road. Because in order to do that, right, they, in a way, I wouldn't say they didn't abandon their off-road heritage, but what they did was they adopted a new heritage and a new thing, which was fuel economy. And the way they did that was they started putting, well, 3 letters. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's the CVT.
Yep, they started putting the CVT, the continuously variable transmission, which actually all the Japanese manufacturers jumped on, right? So Subaru was certainly in the forefront of the CVT, along with Nissan, but all the manufacturers did. None of the Germans did it because they hated them, I suspect. I'm not.
The Germans jumped really heavily into it, actually, in the early 2000s.
And then they jumped right out of it.
Yeah, so like Mini had CVTs, Audis were using CVTs for a while.
Those are the only two. BMW never had a CVT as far as I'm aware. Mercedes never had a CVT.
I'm not so sure.
So the Germans didn't jump. So Audi had an A4 there was an A4 convertible that had a CVT, and you're right, Mini had a CVT, but that was arguably.
Oh no, Mercedes did use it.
Barely.
Yeah, they did use it for a while. Yeah.
No, it was probably in one car for a short amount of time.
Looks like the B class had the CVT.
All right, there you go. Like I said. Anyway, so Subaru jumped in with, into the deep end with the CVT because it gave them good fuel efficiency. So Subaru went from building regular transmissions, and what I mean by that is either manuals or automatics. Mm-hmm. And basically not double down but quadruple down on CVTs. And this is where we get to the part where Subarus are bad off-road. Because I can only think of one transmission that is actually worse off-road in a car. Because let's face it, CVTs are used in almost every side-by-side out there except for the Honda Talon. So they do work in snowmobiles, they work in side-by-sides, but in cars they just do not work off-road. So there's only one transmission I can think of that's actually worse than a CVT off-road, and that's a dual clutch. But unfortunately for Subaru, from an off-road perspective, most of their cars that are purchased now are equipped with CVTs. And I'm talking about the Outback, the Crosstrek, the ones that people would take off-road.
Yeah, and the way this kind of happened in the late 2000s, 2010s, the transition began. And the Forester went to a CVT and the automatic trims, and then, Outback and a Crosstrek, Impreza, Legacy. But the great thing about those is they still offered manual transmission options, right?
Until recently.
And then those kind of started disappearing too. So the Outback's not available in manual. Forester's not available in manual.
This is where we get into more recent history with TFL and how we got on the wrong side of Subaru's PR team, who does not like us. And that is, we took a Subaru off-road and we showed that what the Subaru will do when it gets into loose soil, right? So sand, any kind of loose environment where the wheels do not have traction, in order to protect the CVT. So let's talk about a CVT. A CVT is basically a cone with a belt that goes around the cone, and the belt goes up and down the cone depending on what the throttle's doing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, that's a very basic.
That's a very basic. And unlike a traditional transmission where you're taking 2 gears, and I'm doing this with my fingers, and you're meshing them, right, like this.
Right.
Where there's a physical connection so that the gears are connected. A CVT doesn't have that. The belt can actually start to slip over that cone, and you can actually burn out the belt. And it happens a lot on like side-by-sides. There, the belts burn out when you really push them, and then you replace the belts. Unfortunately, in a car, those belts are usually made of not rubber or silicone, but they're made of metal, and they're very hard and expensive to replace. And so in order for a car to actually spin its tires, you have to lock down that belt. And what Subaru and many manufacturers do is that they decided that in order for you not to burn up that belt, not to break the transmission, the car will actually cut power to the wheels instead of burning up the CVT.
Right.
And so what will happen in many modern Subarus is if you're in a situation where there's soft sand, and like a Jeep will just keep spinning its tires until it digs itself into the ground. A Wrangler, right? A Subaru won't do that. A Subaru, you'll floor it, you'll spin, and then the X mode decides there's no traction, and eventually, no matter how far you put your foot into the accelerator, the tires and wheels will stop spinning because you don't want to burn out the CVT.
Now, what Subaru's been doing is they're still using the same basic concept of the CVT, but they've been using metal chains, right? Which is supposed to be more durable and provide a more solid feedback. But the issue with the CVT is it's a very efficient way to transmit the power to the ground. But when you take off in a CVT, there's like that brief moment where on a manual transmission you use a clutch, on automatic you use a torque converter. On the CVT, you start running into some slip issues that generates heat at low speeds, and especially when rock crawling, right? Or rock crawling is harsh. Going up really steep hills.
Right.
And the old ones really had big issues with these. The new ones have gotten better at it. But what the car does is it limits the power so you don't build a lot of heat into the transmission, so you don't actually start burning up the transmission. It won't let you disintegrate the transmission.
Right. And so what Subaru has done to mitigate that, which is the same thing that every other manufacturer has done, except that Subaru has, decided to call their system X mode, right? Is they have basically a traction control system in place that using ABS sensors on the wheels decides which wheel and tire has traction and which one doesn't. And so in conjunction with the ABS, the system will try to allocate power to whichever wheel has traction, just like most modern vehicles. And Subaru's done a really good job in branding that, calling it X mode, right? So when you push that X mode button, it lets the vehicle know that it's off-road and that there might be wheel spin detected. So what will happen is if, let's say you're going up a hill and all of a sudden the left front wheel is spinning, it's all-wheel drive, it'll send power to the right wheel, which isn't spinning, and help you get up that hill. And that works really well in most instances. Once again, once you get into someplace where it's steep or deep, if you have a Jeep with locking differentials, a Wrangler, right, that wheel will keep spinning until you bury yourself or until you burn off the tire or until you let go of the throttle. In the Subaru, let's say it detects wheel spin on the left wheel, sends power to the right wheel. The right wheel also has wheel spin. Eventually, it will cut power to both wheels, and you'll be dead in the water. That's the bad part. The good part, right? I said they're good and bad off-road, is that they still have really good ground clearance. So almost every Subaru has 8.3 inches of ground clearance, which is about 2 inches more.
Oh, more than that, Dad.
Well,
8.7.
8.7, right, which is about 3 inches more than most family vehicles have.
Yeah, and the thing is the engines are very well suited for the terrain, and the all-wheel drive system is very well suited for the terrain. So you really have three components: the engine, the transmission, the all-wheel drive. Engine, flat fours, most of them are turbocharged now, a lot of torque. All-wheel drive system, symmetrical all-wheel drive. So unlike a lot of the competitors, which are a slip-thin grip system, where the front wheels slip before it sends power to the rear, the symmetrical all-wheel drive is always active, sending some amount of torque to all four wheels. The weak spot in that is always a transmission, though, because the programming will cut power to the engine and therefore cut power to the wheels, so it does not grenade the transmission. Now, I used to be really upset about this, and I really used to be grumpy about it because they aren't very good at hill climbing. For any kind of slow maneuvers across, ditches and ravines, they have issues even when you turn the traction control off. But I've kind of come to accept it now, and I'm for the most part okay with it. I think that the new Subarus are probably in some cases better than their competition off-road because of that ground clearance. As long as you don't point them up anything really steep, it will get you to your campsite.
Yeah, I agree. In like I said, 80% of the situations, our friend Ryan from Driving Sports does really good Subaru reviews. So Ryan, I enjoy watching your reviews. But unfortunately, like in his reviews, he'll take his long-term Subaru up basically a rocky road, right? And there's, I think, one place where the thing kind of gets off kilter. And we're not talking about that, right? We're not talking about like going to your cabin in a snowy situation. right? We're talking about Moab quality off-roading where oftentimes you're in very steep situations, you're in loose sand, you're maybe, in extreme situations where only one wheel has traction, right? This is the kind of off-roading that like Toyota 4Runners, Jeep Wranglers do, right? And I understand Outbacks aren't Wranglers and they're not 4Runners and they're not, hardcore off-roaders. But at the same time, once upon a time, Subaru kind of always punched above their weight class in terms of its off-road ability. And now Subaru still, I think, advertises that these are really good off-road because of X mode, but I don't think they punch above their weight class. I think what Subaru has done is they've built a fuel-efficient tall wagon, which is what it is. It's really a crossover now. That is good to getting you to a ski condition or I'd say to your cabin, off-road. But if you really want to go do serious overlanding where you're going to get into some tricky situations, or if you want to go do some serious off-roading, the vehicle just won't do it, and it won't be happy doing it.
But I think that's fine.
That's fine. Yeah, I agree. But
I mean, I don't understand why you're grumpy, because
I'm grumpy because that old DL did everything that a Jeep Wrangler will do, and we've got a challenge out there. Now, let me put it out there again. We really want to prove this point that either I'm wrong or right. So, the old DL did fins and things, did the same course that we've taken the Jeep Gladiator on, the Jeep Wrangler on, named the pickup truck, and it did it. And you did a great job driving it. And I have this sinking feeling that the new Subaru can't do it. When you have a new vehicle with all the technology that isn't as good off-road as the old one, a 78, then I think you've kind of lost your way.
I disagree, because the new Subarus aren't targeted for Moab. They just aren't. I mean, if you're using the word 4Runner,
under promise, over deliver.
I think if you're using the word 4Runner in your comparison, you're using the wrong word. You got to use words like RAV4 or Highlander, because that's kind of more of the audience.
I agree.
And I think it's fine that it won't do Hell's Revenge, because
I didn't say Hell's Revenge
or Fins and Things. I think it's totally fine that a new Subaru would struggle on Fins and Things, because here's my justification. What did we have to do to get that Subaru to Moab? We put it on a trailer.
Yeah, but we could have driven it there.
But it would have been miserable.
Well, because it's a 1978 car that's underpowered and high. But I would have been happy to drive that there, Tommy. But that car it's a time capsule. Wait. No, I completely disagree. The reason we didn't drive it to Moab was I didn't want to put an additional 1,000 miles on it, because it's got 53,000 miles. It's a pristine example of a survivor. And I would have had no problem actually being in the car and driving it. I think that would have been fun. I just didn't want to put additional miles on it because it's so unique and so rare. It might be the lowest mileage DL in America, and driving it 600 miles there and back would have proved nothing.
But there's a fact to be made here, right?
Yeah.
That car will do maybe 80 miles an hour brand new on flat terrain. Right. In the mountains, you're looking at 50. The new Subarus aren't as good off-road, I agree. But the new Subarus will also do 75 up any pass with air conditioning and heated seats and a full suite of airbags. So will
Highlander, and so will any other you can't compare.
No, but here's the point. You sacrifice the off-road ability for the comfort.
My point was, once upon a time, Subarus underpromised and overperformed. Today, I think they do the opposite.
Yeah, but they
off-road.
I know, but you can't have...
I was watching a Subaru commercial, and the commercial is like, a couple's driving a Subaru out back, and they get to a fork in the road, and one is a dirt road, and one is a regular road. And they're like, Subaru makes this pitch, right? You've got a Subaru, you can take the dirt road, right? And so in their advertising, what they're saying is, this is a car built for going off-road. Right, that's what that two roads, one's paved, one isn't paved, and I'm saying I think that the old ones were actually better at it than the new ones.
Yes,
and we have this challenge out. So by the way, let me finish the challenge. Right, so the challenge is, if you guys can take an Outback and do the same thing in Fins and Things that we did, we will make you a YouTube star. We will film it. Call us, email us at info@TFLcar. Bring your Outback to Fins and Things. We'll film it, and we'll make you YouTube famous.
It has to be a new one.
A new one, of course. A new Outback. I don't want a 20-year-old Outback. And the other thing that you can't, or it's very hard to do, and this is not just Subaru, it's any modern vehicle with independent suspension, it's hard to lift, right? One of the things you always want to do is get more ground clearance, get better wheel articulation, and Subarus, even the older ones, are hard to lift just because they're independent suspension. And the reason for that is, if you have a solid axle, which is a much more basic form of suspension, right? what you have is basically like a Jeep has a ladder frame, and then underneath are two axles that are solid, and you could put a spacer between those axles and the ladder frame and raise the vehicle up. And that's relatively easy to do. It's just a puck lift. It's much harder to do that with a car with independent suspension. And a car with independent suspension in general is much better on road than it is than a solid axle vehicle. So you gain something, but you lose something.
What is the only thing that makes that Subaru so good off-road or old one? There's only one thing that makes it good off-road.
Well, it's got great approach and departure angles.
3 things. Approach and departure, ground clearance. But the big one, what's the big one?
Certainly isn't tires.
No, it's weight.
Yeah, that's true.
Weight is a single thing that makes that so good off-road. And
approach, departure, and breakover.
That's a 2,000-pound car. The new ones are 4,000 pounds, right? But the reason they're 4,000 pounds is because they're quick and they're comfortable and they're refined. That car isn't quick, comfortable, or refined, the old one. And that's fine. I will happily sacrifice the off-road capability to live in an accident over 3 miles an hour.
Look, I think, you just help me clarify something. I think the reason I'm grumpy about it is, we did some testing, 7 years ago, showing what the vehicle can and cannot do. And ever since then, the Subaru PR team has disliked us and refused to work with us. And I think I do have a grudge, not against the brand, I hope, but against the team because of that, right? I feel like we did our job. And maybe they did their job. Maybe their job is to show that the car is, great in all aspects, and so that's why they stopped giving them to us. But I feel like, we did our job, and we try to be fair and we try to be equitable. And in exchange for that, we got blacklisted by Subaru, and that hurts. And so maybe that's part of the chip on my shoulder.
I think that is part of it. Yeah, but I think it's important to keep in mind that the cars are still, relative to their competitors, probably better off-road than most of the competitors. An Outback is going to be better off-road than another lifted wagon. It's going to be better off-road than
let's talk about that.
Volvo.
So recently, and I mean very recently, a lot of the competitors have decided that people really love off-roading, they love overlanding, and they're bringing a lot of kind of their off-road cred, I guess is a good word, to their car. So Outback competes directly with the RAV4.
Let's look
directly,
at,
right?
No, Forester. Forester competes. Let's look at Forester. It's a good example. Forester competes directly with RAV4, CRV, Escape.
So I would say apples to apples. Any vehicle, and this doesn't have to be a Subaru. So the Subaru will have more ground clearance,
right?
And that's great.
It'll probably have better approach and departure.
It might have better approach, but that's so we end up buying an Outback because Subaru didn't give us one, wouldn't lend us one. I should say give us one. They were never going to give us one, but give us one for review. So we end up buying one. And you know what? I fell in love with that vehicle. I really love that Outback. I thought as an everyday mainstream vehicle, it had everything I wanted. It had a cool 4-cylinder engine. It was a little underpowered, but that's okay. It had incredible fuel economy. Everything was just honest and worked like it should. There was tons of room in the back, so if you had a dog, it would be a great vehicle for that. And our friend Sophia just bought an Outback for that same reason, right? As a package, it is really good off-road. But, here's the but. If you put that up against any car with a traditional transmission, with a torque converter, that torque converter will always be better.
Yeah, but the car is going to be worse.
But the torque converter, I think the car, given apples to apples, even if
I disagree.
I think the traditional transmission car will go farther, go up a steeper hill, go into deeper off-roading than the car with a CVT. It doesn't have to be a Subaru. Any car with a CVT.
No, I completely disagree. Because let's go back to example Forester, right?
Right.
CVT,
right?
But it's got a lot of ground clearance.
Right.
I just had the opportunity to take the RAV4 off-road.
Right. The new Adventure.
No, more than that.
The TRD Pro.
Not a good experience. Not at all. The TRD off-road, it was not a good off-road experience. Taking the CRVs off-road, not great. Escape.
We've actually taken a lot of those
Escape,
off-road
Equinox.
recently.
None of them are very good. And I haven't taken a new Forester off-road, but I'm confident that car would be better off-road.
Why are you confident?
Because it's got better angles. I mean, you can have a torque converter in a NASCAR, but you're not going to get to where you're going to go because it doesn't have ground clearance.
So the closest, since we haven't had any of the newest ones, the closest one we could talk about was the Forester that we had, and
the Outback.
The Outback. When we buy a car, we're more likely to put it into more extreme conditions just because it's our money that we're spending, and if we break it, I feel much more comfortable breaking our own car than putting a manufacturer's car in harm's way, right? It's like when you borrow something from somebody, you want to treat it with the utmost respect and not put it in harm's way. And we put that car up the hardest test we had at that time, which was Gold Mine Hill, right?
Yep.
There were 3 stages before they closed it. The first stage is very hard, and it did well, right? The second stage, it took a little bit of work to get up the second stage.
Yep.
And the third stage, it did, but the only reason it did it was because we really pushed it hard. Right?
Yeah.
We really pushed it. I mean, more so than we had pushed any manufacturer car. And what ended up happening is basically the third stage, there was a big hole, and what you end up doing is putting the car off kilter so that you only 2 wheels have traction. That was the whole trick behind it. Or 1 wheel at some point, right? But basically it's like only 2 wheels have traction. And the car couldn't do it. I'm like, you could smell it. I'm like, Tommy, keep going. And eventually you kept going. You were driving it, right?
Yeah.
You kept taking a run at it, and you moved the car over so that it went from being 2 wheels to being 3 wheels, and then it went up the hill.
Right.
But man, we worked hard.
I mean, I agree. There are situations where you get a Subaru in and it won't work. It'll get stuck. But you'll be able to get to those situations where you won't in some of the competition. So, like, for example, the TRD Offroad RAV4. 42.
I don't want to take a dump on the TRD Offroad.
But it was 19-degree approach angle.
Right.
It was scraping on all sorts of little ruts and divots. And I don't think you would in the Forester because it's a 23-degree approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think you'll have more approach and departure angles on the Forester, but put that TRD into soft sand and put the Subaru into soft sand and see which one will come out of it.
Well, we should try it because I think the Forester would do okay. I really do think it would do okay.
And when we did it up a steep hill, it just floored nothing. And it's an issue that maybe has gone away over the years because it's been 7 years now that we've been able to do that test. But we had that same issue come up last year, or was it 2 years ago, when we had the one that we bought. Once again, it would cut power. You were up that stage through, you'd have it floored, and nothing was happening. I remember walking around the camera, and I'm like, Tommy, are you floored? Front driver's wheel wasn't spinning. Front passenger wheel wasn't spinning. Rear driver's wheel wasn't spinning. Rear passenger wheel wasn't spinning. And I'm like, Tommy, are you floored? And you're like, yeah, I'm floored.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, at least we could get there. I really think that in some of its competition, you wouldn't even be able to get to that situation.
This is a conversation we're having, and my friend Steve, who I recommended buy an Outback, doesn't care about, right? Because he lives in Chicago, and what he cares about is fuel economy and reliability and comfort, and the Outback has provided that for him over 100,000 miles now.
Well, let us know in the comment section below, what do you think of the modern Subarus in terms of their capability and their fuel economy?
And we two things. The challenge is out there, guys.
Yeah.
So if you have a new Outback and you're willing to put it in harm's way, we're not going to be responsible for braking. So if it breaks, it's on you guys. We live on YouTube money, but we would love to make you, YouTube famous. So we'll go out to Moab. Email us at info@TFLcar. We will film you doing fins and things. Fins and things is actually we just ran the whole thing last weekend again, and it gets really hard. There are parts where I think on the scale of 1 to 10, what do they consider it?
It's only a 4.
It's like a 4, but there are parts where it's
much harder than a 4.
It's much harder, yeah, and big build Jeeps have issues with it, but we'll only do the front part that's relatively tame, and I'm really curious. I want to see how good or not the Subaru will do. It's an open question still in my mind.
Yeah, and we'd love to know.
Yeah, we'd love to know. And if you want to look at that video where Tommy took the Subaru DL through fins and things, let's put a link below, or go to TFLcar.com and just do a search for Subaru DL, and you'll see that video in Moab. It was quite phenomenal, and I was amazed at what that little guy could do. And you're right, it is because it's lightweight. It's like a little side by side.
For sure. Yep. Thanks for watching.
And see you guys next time. Ciao.